You are frozen.
No. You're listening to Dumpster Diving with
Janice.
and Jane. And today, Janice is going to disclose our topic of discussion. It looks like we're having some technical difficulties because I keep freezing and then she freezes. So hopefully this will all work out.
How about this? Why don't we go off camera just to see if that helps? Because they can't see us anyway, so they could give a damn how much what we look like right now. Yeah.
True story. True story.
All right. All right. So, you guys, we're so glad that you are with us today. And we were trying to decide like what music we wanted to lead in. And then we were like, you know what? We're going to go with no music to lead in because we decided today that we want to spend a little bit of time lifting up Suicide Prevention Month. All of you guys probably know already that this is the month that we bring more awareness to that really tough topic. And so as Jane and I were planning, we kind of thought, you know what, given the nature of our audience, it makes a lot of sense for us to have a conversation about, kind of how we have, experienced suicide in our lives, what we know about how the mental health of, especially of our teens and our kids in general, is suffering right now, etc. So we're going to spend a little time doing that, right? So the way we're going to do this is, let's start off, and we kind of do this with all of our episodes and talk a little bit about like the why us part, right? So of course, every time I feel like you go on social media, you go on the news, you go on any site, you see another incident of somebody losing their life through suicide. And whether it's a celebrity that everybody knows and loves, whether it's somebody in your community, whether it's somebody you don't know anything about, the scariest thing I think right now happening in our world and our country is that suicide is touching people of almost every age, right? There's almost not an age too young where we can feel safe and feel like we don't have to worry about a child engaging in self-harm. Last year alone, almost 50,000 people died from suicide. That doesn't count all the people who attempted suicide. That just is the number of people who succeeded in the attempt. And so with that in mind, we're going to jump into this really hard conversation today. And I think, Jane, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with, I have 2 or 3 different stories in my mind about how suicide has impacted my life. And so I'm going to go ahead and kick off with one of those and then turn it over to you to talk a little bit about just your thinking around, when we talk about suicide prevention, kind of just your general thinking around it. And then I'll come back and talk about a couple of the others. But mostly we want to get into today, folks, how do we navigate this, right? As parents, like, how do we navigate a world where suicide is so prevalent? And how do we make sure that we are keeping our kids safe, right? At the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. So how does that sound, Jane?
Sorry, I was muted. I have
That's okay.
have airplanes at my house and one's flying over right now. So I don't know if you can hear it or not, but hopefully you can't. No, that's great. Let's roll into it. And I actually, as you were talking, I actually thought of a couple of people. So I was like, oh wait, no, I do know some people. So we can definitely talk about that.
Okay. That sounds all right. I love it. So I will say and share with all of you guys that my very first interaction, if you will, with suicide was when I was a teenager. I was probably about 14 years old, and my older sister attempted suicide. It's not something I talk about very often, and the reason I don't talk about it very often is because really knowing what I know now, when I look back on it, what I would say is that she engaged in a significant cry for help. And the reason I say that is because she basically took a handful of Tylenol, right? And this is going to sound really horrible, but I remember, like, we were on our way to school, we were going to the bus stop, and I remember her saying to me, what would happen if somebody took a lot of like Tylenol or something? And I was like, they would probably get really sick. That's about it. And she was like, okay. And that was it. Like, I didn't even think twice about it. In fact, I was a little annoyed because I don't know. I think in my mind, I was like, is she trying to get attention? Like, what is she trying to do right now? And for those of you who've been listening to us for a while, if you go all the way back to my origin story, you know that, our existence, our household was a living hell. And so and my sister, you heard some of my origin story. My sister took the brunt of that. She was not like me, rather she suffered at the hands of our stepfather in terms of, being sexually assaulted, but she also took a lot of physical abuse from him. So she really just had a lot of cards stacked against her. But later that day, got the call to, leave school early. And long story short, we ended up in the emergency room because she had gotten really ill. And I share that now because it was definitely a cry for help in terms of her trying to just let the world around her know that the things happening to her were more than she could handle, right? More, and she in retrospect, I look at that and I think to myself, on some level, she might have thought those pills would have killed her, and she might have hoped that they would, given what we were experiencing. And I think I actually referenced this, Jane, in my origin story, because what I talked about was there are a lot of ways that the system disappoints us. And that was one of those instances, because I remember vividly being in the emergency room, and my mom coming out to talk with me one-on-one and to tell me that CPS was involved, there were social workers, they were interviewing her, and that if they talked to me, I needed to lie. Because if I told them what had happened or what had been happening, that they would take us from them. And this, gets into a whole different, like, we could go way down a different road in terms of the options that kids have when they're in really abusive situations. Because as a kid who, only knew what foster care was from TV shows, I definitely immediately had that thought of, I'd rather deal with the devil I know than the devil I don't know, right? But in the end, it didn't matter because nobody ever asked me a damn thing. And so even though I know that in that emergency room, she said a lot of things out loud to adults about what was going on, it was never pursued. And to this day, I have no idea how that's true, right? Except that back then, the system wasn't nearly as prepared to handle those situations as it is now. So my sister was the very first experience I had with someone close to me who made that attempt. So when we think about the why of why it's important to bring it up, it's because that's a drastic example in terms of the condition she was living in. But there are lots of kids out there, especially kids who, and adults too, who seemingly have normal, happy lives, who suffer from mental illnesses that drive them there. So Jane, before I go into another story, what you got for us?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a hard topic to discuss. And for me, it's like I said before we started recording, it's not very comfortable because so many different ways you can run with this, and end all be all is that we're losing our friends and family members, to suicide because of underlying issues, whether they be trauma or mental health or physical health. I mean, there's people that don't take their lives because they're depressed and they're hopeless or anything. They're just in chronic pain and they cannot handle it anymore. It is something that they can't live through anymore. There's, and then or whether it's mental pain or physical pain or heart pain, there's pain, and it's not being able to see. And I'm just purely speaking off the cuff. I don't have scientific proof behind this or anything, but it's not being able to see the end of that, whatever it is, whatever is torturing them, and so, and I can only imagine that getting to that point where you think that that's the only result or resort that you have, maybe due to a lack of support or a lack of a healthy environment, having abusive people in your life or people that are always trying to keep you down. I mean, the abuse is, I'd much rather have physical abuse than psychological abuse and mental abuse in those manners. As a kid, I was like, just spank me and stop screaming at me, like, just like, let's go with it. So, not to derail what we're talking about, but, all of those situations do things to people, and everybody's affected by it differently. And so, and we were talking about stories and stuff like that. And I do know a couple of people that have actually committed suicide and were successful. And it was traumatizing in the way of, oh wow, it affects people, even people that have what you would think of everything. And I'm speaking of two very famous musicians that I just happen to have in my world for an extended amount of time, and that's Chris Cornell and Chester Bennington. And they both passed, Chris Cornell committed suicide in May, and Chester Bennington committed suicide in July. And just a couple of months away from each other, and they were best friends.
Oh,
And
wow.
so sometimes suicide affects people in the most extreme way, where they have that loss, and they don't feel like they can live without that person, because they were best friends, or for whatever the reason was, but it leaves so many unanswered questions and everything else. But most of all, we lose the people that we love, and that's what we're trying to prevent and bring awareness around. And why we're having this conversation is because I don't know what I would do if one of my children were to commit suicide. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if I would ever recover from that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm with you on that 100%. And that's why I think we decided to spend some time on this topic today, because, we both have kids of all ages, and, there's an underlying fear, right? That anything can happen, right? We all know that the world is an unpredictable place, but
Right.
and the thought of them being gone under any conditions, but certainly under something like this, is just devastating. And that'll lead me to, I had a couple of different situations as a school principal. One of the really hard realities that educators carry is that, it is a people business. And so you lose people, sorry for that, you lose people for all kinds of reasons, right? We lose people to illnesses, we lose people to accidents. And two different times as a school principal, I had incidents where we had students who attempted suicide. And in my tenure, one who died, and one who fortunately at the last minute was kind of pulled off the brink, so to speak. And in both situations, right, what linked them is, in both cases, very different young men, ran in very different circles. There was no correlation between the two of them, except that when I look back on them, in both cases, it was a shock. In both cases, it was nobody saw it coming, right? And in the first case, it was a devastating case of a young man who, one morning before school, seemingly like any other school day, broke into his father's gun safe, got his gun, went to his bedroom, shut the door, and shot himself in the head. Didn't leave a note, didn't have conversations with anyone in advance. He was 16, and his parents, like they're both in the house getting ready, right? His family was all there. And of course, didn't even really recognize what the sound was when they heard it, and then raced to his room and found him. And it was across the board a devastation for everybody, right? Because
Yeah.
nobody saw it coming.
And those are
Uh,
the ones that are the most puzzling,
right.
and I think that hit us the hardest is when it's the least expected.
That's right. That's exactly right. And you can imagine the months that followed, everybody digging into, and everybody trying to figure it out. And honestly, from a school principal's perspective, he was a student who I knew by name. I did not know him well. So I couldn't have spoken to, right? Was this a shock? Was it not a shock? I relied on his teachers and his friends and his family to say that. And it was really one of those, this is a kind of behind the curtains look for people. One of those moments where his family never called it a suicide. And so therefore we could never use that language, which was really hard for us, because we wanted, of course, to talk openly about it, but we had to use the language that he was no longer alive, right? That he shot himself with a gun. We could say that, but we couldn't say he committed suicide. And to this day, his parents basically, I won't hypothesize here why, but have avoided that terminology. And so, yes, it was one of those situations where it was, you know, everybody around him who was close to him was changed forever, right? And it certainly breeds a great deal of just fear, because if he was susceptible, then maybe the kid sitting right next to me is susceptible, right, etc. The second student was a close call, and that student is always he's gonna be in my heart and my mind forever, because he was a kid who, same thing, I knew him by name, you know, we would chit chat in the hallways, that kind of thing. Never knew him any more deeply than that. He was never a student who, you know, had behavior issues. He was not an academically a superstar. He was an average kid by all accounts, and just a nice kid, right? And he came into my office one day after school, and which was unusual, right, for him to want to talk to me one-on-one. And he asked to talk with me, and we sat down together. And he just very calmly, very quietly said, "I wanted to tell you that last night I almost killed myself." And I was just stunned. And I just kind of said, "Okay, so tell me about that." And so he proceeded to tell me what he had been planning, and that he had all the things that he needed ready, etc. But at the last minute, he decided to call a friend, and he told the friend what he was about to do. And the friend talked him out of it, right? The friend was the one who backed him away from it, and got him to kind of take a deep breath and take a pause. And so you can imagine, right? There were a million things for me going through my head, not the least of which was, we have to better equip our kids to deal with this, right? Because up until that point, typically when we talk about suicide or mental health in schools, at that point, right, it's different now. But the message was, you know, get help, get help, get help, find an adult, get help. But the truth of the matter is, and this situation really smacked me in the face with it, kids get help from each other, right?
Yes.
Teenagers especially are turning to each other. So we can't just say, tell an adult. We have to equip the teen. Now, again, not because I want that friend to feel like they're a mental health professional, because that's going to weigh on them, but more that they need to at least be equipped in the moment to give them time to then be able to reach out to somebody else who can help, you know?
Well, then it sounds like more so than anything, what we need is, you know, coaching these kids on how to best support their friends, you know,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
showing how to have that support. Because, you know, tell somebody, if I would have told my mother, because I mean, at one point when I was 12, you know, and that's pretty much the only time as a child I really considered it.
Yeah.
And I laugh at myself because it was so silly on how I was going to do it, but that was my thinking at the time. I was going to go eat pencil lead. Like that was my thing. Like, oh, I heard that
Because your 12-year-old brain thought that would work, right?
yeah, because I got a bunch of mechanical pencil lead, and I was sitting there and I was crying. I hated my home life. I absolutely hated it. And it was severely abusive and neglectful and all of those things. And but then the thing that stopped me was, who's going to take care of my brother and sister, my younger brother and sister. My older
Yeah.
brother's 6 years older than me, you know, and he's already a teenager and he's in high school and he doesn't spend any time with us. Now I'm the oldest and I have to protect them, you
That's
know,
right.
and that's what kept me around, or from not doing anything, because I knew that if it didn't work, my mother was going to kill me.
Yeah.
Like she would have killed me, absolutely
Yeah.
killed me. And so, you know, it was like, okay, do I do it myself and let my brother and sister, you know, survive, or do I get in a lot of trouble? Yeah, I'm just not going to do it, and I'm going to make sure that my brother and sister survive, you know. And so that's what I did. But, you know, I seriously contemplated it, and I couldn't talk to my mother about that, you know. And even to this day, with her being 75 years old and me being 44, I still couldn't talk to her about that. She wouldn't understand, you know.
Yeah.
So but it's more so about the support and being able to talk to your friends and stuff like that. And so I pay attention to the friendships that my daughters have, and I don't get involved, but I'm curious of who they're hanging out with, because I want to make sure that if they're not comfortable talking to me, that they have a good friend with a good level head that they can talk to.
That's right. Well, and it's helping them see that balance, right? Of
Right.
how their friends can support them and how adults can. And it's interesting that you say that about your mom, because this young man, his whole point for coming to talk to me, and that's where he went next with his story, was he said, I'm coming to talk to you because I know I need to tell my parents, because I know I need help, but I don't know how to do that. And so I basically said, well, I can coach you through how to do it, or we can do it together. And he
Right.
said, can we do it together? And so we got on the phone with his mom and his dad, and we talked through it. And my job in that conversation was to simply make sure we stayed focused on him, right? Because I will say this, when you know your kid is suffering like that, there's obviously your whole heart is about your child, but there
Right.
is a part of you that is about you, right? Your
What
fear,
did I
your
do? Right.
over,
Right.
right? Yeah.
The
Um,
guilt.
the guilt of, how did my kid get here, and how is this even possible? Or and this happens too, you guys, and this is a really important part of this conversation, or it gets dismissed, right? And by the best of most well-meaning of parents, right? You can love your kid more than anything and still, unfortunately, hurt them in ways that you don't intend, right? And the dismissal piece is really like, well, maybe you thought it was that serious, but maybe it wasn't that serious. And that comes from embarrassment, right? Like there's a little bit of embarrassment that comes
Exactly.
along with that fear, right?
Right.
Um, and I remember having a really close girlfriend who, back in the day, whose kid was having some significant mental health issues. And she's an college educated adult, right? And she did not want to do anything that could lead him to medication or any serious therapy, because she came from a family that believed in pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and solving problems yourself, and that using drugs for mental health was not it was a myth, right? Like that's not something you should really do. So can you imagine, right? Like, and so there are a lot of ways that parents can um very accidentally, right,
Right.
hurt the situation, right, versus
Oh,
help
for
the
sure.
situation.
Well, I mean, going back to the embarrassment part of it, I mean, that's where I come from, where my mom would have killed me. It would have embarrassed the shit out of her to have a
Exactly.
child that failed a suicide attempt. Are you
Yeah.
kidding? Like that would have pissed her off so much that she would have killed me,
Yeah.
and like, and then gaslit me for, oh, how dare I, have think I have such a terrible life. You haven't seen anything yet, and blah blah blah, because that's what I heard on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So it was like, shit, if I'm not successful at this, I'm gonna really hate life,
That's right.
and then I won't have any pencil lead around me, or whatever. But
Exactly.
like then I'll be punished and ridiculed and made fun of, and all of those things, and you couldn't even do that, blah blah blah. I could hear it all ringing through my head, and I'm like, I'd rather just live this life right now
I'd
because
rather
I
live this
don't
life
want
than
to.
the life I would have if I tried and failed. I can't. I mean, what a just a I don't even
That's
write
what
as
I
a
thought about.
horrifying
Like
place to be,
legit.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
legit. That's what I thought about. So in those
Uh,
instances, the reason why that child came to you is, or maybe he had a parent that would have been really embarrassed if it was
yeah.
something that got out,
Yeah.
and because that, when you have an abusive household and you are re-released into the abusive household after doing something like that, it's 10 times worse. So, it's so hard to talk about, Janice.
I know.
It's so
No, it is, which is why we're doing it, because
I
that's what we do for
know.
our people. It's what we do for our people. And that is, now that you say it that way, that's exactly like life for my sister after her attempt was worse than it ever could have been. She was essentially on lockdown, right?
Right.
Because not only has she done that, she had brought all of these strangers into our life. She
Right.
had opened doors to their secrets, even
Right.
though, again, I still don't know how, but that it never went anywhere from there. Um, and
And
so,
shame
yeah,
on them, by
life
the
was, what's
shame,
that?
shame on them. And
Yeah,
the similar thing happened to me as well at around that time, where there was sexual abuse and it just gets dismissed. And
yeah,
um, that, I mean, come on, that is a catalyst for suicidal tendencies.
yeah. Oh my gosh, of course. Any kind of abusive situations like that, right? So let's talk about, now you guys have a good sense of why, Jane and I felt like it was important to add our voices to this. And so let's talk a little bit then about like, and we're going to talk about like what signs you should be looking for, and then things that you can do, right, to support your kids. And honestly, it's a little bit hard to do this from the perspective too of it feels like everybody knows this, right? We hear about suicide all the time. And then I have to remind myself that I feel that way because I'm an educator. And so in the world of education, we are hyper aware. We do have specific protocols to follow if a kid indicates any kind of ideation, right? We do have all those things. And so and so I have to remind myself that just because it's there's like a heightened level of awareness in my brain doesn't mean that there's a common heightened level of awareness. And so we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the warning signs and then some of the things to be considering. And when Jane and I were looking at this research earlier, one of the comments that we made was how tricky this is, because a lot of the signs that you should be looking for to ascertain if your teen is at risk of something like this are also the signs of being a teenager, right? Like there are signs like changes in behavior, expressions of hopelessness, changes in sleep patterns, loss of interest. If you took those out of context and just said, hey, my kid's showing a loss of interest in their usual stuff, I'd be like, and they're
And they're
15.
13, right?
Right? Exactly. So it really is tough. And so I think it speaks to, like, as parents, we have to be really cognizant of the natural course of how our kids change over time, but then also be looking for things that seem out of the norm of that, right? So changes in sleep patterns that are, usually my kid's not going to bed until midnight and then they get up for school. And now all of a sudden, like, they're not sleeping at all, right? Like they're walking around looking like a zombie, or they're sleeping all day. I literally cannot get them out of bed, right? All the things I've done in the past that have been the typical ways I get them out of bed and they know I'm serious now, it's time to get up, don't work anymore. That's the kind of nuance that you're going to be looking for when you look for some of these signs.
Well, it's more extremes, but
Yeah,
sometimes they're subtle, and
that's
sometimes
right.
you don't even see them coming. So I'm sure there's a couple of more that we can name off. What's the rest of your list before I cut you off, Janice?
No, not at all. But your point was actually well positioned, because those are some of the things that are typical characteristics of teens. And like you said, I love the way you said that, Jane. You're looking for the extremes. There are also things that are screaming in your face warning signs, right? Things like giving away their possessions, right? All of a sudden, you actually see that they're giving away things that, like last week, they were telling their younger sister not to touch that because it's the most important thing in the world to them. And this week they're giving it to them, right? Um, Obviously, substance abuse is an indicator. Self-harm is an indicator. And self-harm, you guys, for me, this becomes the conversation around, we have to really pay attention. And we are all guilty of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month goes by, and I realize I haven't really like looked closely at my kid, right? Like actually spent time where we weren't watching a movie together or we weren't engaging and actually just like paid attention to them, right? And so self-harm is a really powerful indicator. And a part of the way you can know to look for self-harm is if your kid very suddenly changes how they dress, right? They change their attire and
Right.
they're wearing like long sleeves in the dead of the summer,
Yeah, they're
right?
seasonally not adept to what's going on with their clothing.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Which again, my 16-year-old will wear a sweatshirt in the summer, right? But I also know that that's normal for her. If all of a
Right.
sudden they're doing that, right? Out of and you hadn't noticed it before. And frankly, even to notice when they do have the occasional short sleeves on or the shorts on or what have you, because under the arms, behind the legs, those kinds of things tend to be places that we see that happen.
Right.
Obviously, and this seems really obvious, you guys, but if they're talking about suicide, if your kid says something out loud about suicide or expresses any kind of indication of harm, to Jane's point earlier, you can't dismiss that, right? And I
Right.
do think that it's easy to dismiss. They're attention seeking, they're being dramatic, they saw it on a television, whatever. Even if your kid is attention seeking, being dramatic, copying something they saw from something else, even if all of those things are true, it is much better to treat it as a serious probability than it is to dismiss it and regret that later down the road.
Right.
So those are some of the other ones. What are you thinking, Jane?
I was just thinking about just the different signs and stuff like that. And to add on to the clothing thing, kids, we all dress I dress odd sometimes. I like being in different outfits and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And so you can never really say, oh, that's a Jane outfit for sure, because you never know what you're going to see me in. But it's more so like the refusal to, like, let's say it is hot and they're sweaty and they won't pull up their sleeves.
Yeah.
Refuse,
Yes.
or stuff like that. And it's like, okay, something's going on, stuff like that. The and like the giving the things away, that's a big one. Just all of a sudden, things that they've always truly treasured are now something that they can just give away and be,
Yes.
with it is definitely something to look at. But even eating habits and stuff like that, we all know our kids very well, but I think we take it for granted. And there's, as much as they don't want us in their face as teenagers and they want to have their hoodie on and their hood up. I mean, Janice, you do all the videos and you imitate a teenager so well. And I love it because it's so true. But at the same time, they want the attention at the same time. So
Right.
how I kind of like communicate with my kids during those times where they've kind of been down or whatever is I communicate with their favorite things. I'll go get one of their favorite treats or something like that and not even tell
Yep.
them I'm home with it. If they're excited, if I regulate that based off of like you said, if they don't like their normal things anymore. If I walked into the house and handed over a blended coffee drink over to Jenny and she didn't go her exact quote every single time, ooh, thanks. If she didn't do that and just
Yeah.
kind of rolled over, I would know that there was something definitely wrong because that girl is food motivated. And if I ever
Yeah.
bring her something with whipped cream on the top, it's always, ooh, thanks.
Yeah.
So I know, and she's a quiet girl. She keeps to herself. She hangs out with her friends on Roblox and does her thing and doesn't really talk a lot. So she's one that I have my eye on, but I
Yeah.
know how to get, how to gauge her. And so, but that's because I have a really close relationship with her. Nothing nothing beats a close relationship with your children.
Of
Nothing.
course.
And
Yep.
that's where you're going to get the honesty and them coming to you and talking to you. My oldest daughter came and talked to me when she knew she had something going on in her teenage years, and I didn't understand it at the time. And granted, I was still a young mom, and so I didn't understand it, but as I got older and have, more kids getting older and everything else, I'm now understanding it. She was coming to me telling me she felt like she had a mental health disorder, and I didn't understand it, but she got the help and everything else. And now she's on medication that helps her with it and everything else. If I would have just, ignored her and not talked to her about it, and she ended up going to the doctor for it because, at the time I didn't have health insurance. So she ended up going once she got health insurance, but figured it out, but we talked about it, and even though I didn't understand it and I had no
Yep.
idea what she was talking about, just the fact that I sat there and listened to her and talked to her about it, I'm sure made her feel better,
That's right.
and worked on those things. So sometimes, and most of the time as parents, if we don't understand something, it scares us and then we want to dismiss it and we want to push it away and we don't want to deal with it because it scares us. But those are the things that we really need to listen to. And those are
Yeah.
the things that we really need to get involved in and just dive in head first, because no change comes from being comfortable. And
That's
if
right.
you truly want to prevent future trauma or anything like that, or just having a mental disorder and just sitting there, get involved and get them seen and get them all of those things, because it's better to know than not know. And every parent would much rather have their kid around than not around.
That's right. Well, and that whole it's better to know than to not know, right? I had a close friend with a daughter who, they had gone through a divorce and she, the daughter, opted for counseling just to help kind of work through that, and no real big warning signs or anything like that. Just kind of like I'm going to say the usual, if you will, right? When you go through an event like that as a kid. But when they finally got in there and they were actually doing the typical kind of like blanket assessments they do when you start with working with a counselor, one of the things that they found was that she absolutely had depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideations. And again, just the whole like complete shock factor. Now, fortunately, she was already a parent who, okay, your kid needs counseling, you get them counseling. You don't question it. You don't ask why. You don't try and convince them that they're fine. You just do it, right? Because why wouldn't you? Why not, right? Um, but the shock that came from that, and she ended up, going on like a mild antidepressant kind of a drug, and even that, for some families is there are a lot of reasons why they push back on that, whether they're, belief systems, religion,
Yeah.
whatever it is. And they don't kind of accept that, despite all of the medical science and research out there, right? In terms of, there are people who literally have a chemical imbalance in their brain, and the medication simply balances it, right? That's all it's doing. But to your point, like, that's it's I love how you framed, Jane, the idea of it's about having a close relationship with your kid. And in our teen years, it is the hardest. There's no question, right? In their teen years, that is typically when our teens are trying to keep us at arm's length. And so figuring out the ways that we still are close to them. And I love your example with your daughter in terms of the simplicity of knowing what to expect in terms of a reaction over something she loves. And if you don't get it, knowing that that's a warning sign, right? That simple little thing is something that I think can be a takeaway, right, for folks to consider. As I'm looking at our time, let's go ahead then and talk a little bit about, what can we do, right, when we start to see these things? And we're already kind of talking about that. And this conversation, by the way, I feel like is more important than ever before, because there's no question that the suicide rate has increased since COVID, right? We all know, again, well, I shouldn't say it that way. I feel like there's a lot of news coverage these days around mental health and mental well-being of kids, and how much our kids are struggling as coming out of that, right? Because of the social isolation, because of the additional academic challenges they faced, because of parental stress, right? All of their parents were locked on too, and increased parental stress in the adults only translates to more stress in the kids, et cetera. So let's think a little bit, then dig into some of the things that folks can do if they start to be concerned, or they just want to be more aware, right, of where their kids are in terms of their mental health. You've already talked about working on that close relationship, knowing the things your kids love, testing the waters with those things, right, to use as an indicator. I would add to that, make time for conversations, right? And by that, I mean, not it's a family business, it's family meeting time, and we're going to sit across the table, but just make casual time for conversation, whether it's making a routine of going on a walk, whether it's going on a drive, once a week we're going to get carry out, but we're going to go pick it up in the car together versus having it delivered. Create that time where you have one-on-one space with your kids, so that if there's an issue, it can be surfaced, right? Because it's usually not going to be surfaced in moments where they see that you're busy, right? And so you have to create times where it's clear that you're not busy, and they can actually say things out loud to you. What would you add, Jane, in terms of ways that parents can support?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with you. I think that another thing that I do with my kids is I take them out on dates, just one-on-one. And
Yep.
so, we do plenty of things together, but it's about that one-on-one time where they can, voice their frustrations about their sibling, or, and I have a total open door with my girls. If you have a problem with me, tell me. Did I do something to make you mad? Well, yeah, when you said this, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that affected you that way. I didn't mean for that to happen. I'm sorry, and it's like, oh, okay, cool. Because my two youngest daughters, fortunately, wear their hearts on their sleeve, and so I can tell from a mile away when something's going on with them. But again, I contribute that to the relationship that I have with them. And so we talk about everything. I don't scold them or berate them, or shake my finger at them when they tell me about bad things that they've done, nothing that's going to harm anybody else, but things that they shouldn't have done, and we kind of laugh about it and I go, okay, what lesson did you learn about that? Oh, I learned this. Okay, good. Are you going to do it again? No, I'm not. Okay, cool. Stuff like that, where, you know, when we were growing up, if I would have shared 90% of the stuff that I share, that my kids share with me, I wouldn't be here right now.
That's
Just,
right.
just a little
Yeah.
thing. So, it's about really just treating your kids with the utmost respect that you expect, from them. And so that's what I would add to it, is just that going on dates and the one-on-one time is super important, especially when you have multiple kids. They need that
That's right.
one-on-one time. Each one of them's different. So you're going to have to do different things, and but spend the time the way that they would want to spend it, and allow them that space and support to be able to talk to you about whatever it is that they need to talk to you about.
Yeah, that I love all of that. I love the idea of the one-on-one date. I think that's so important. And like you said, even when you have multiple kids, but remember, if you're in a household with more than one parent, then there's a really wonderful divide and conquer opportunity, right? In terms of you guys taking turns, right? Taking one-on-one dates with different kids. And if you're not, right, and you hear that idea and you're just like, there's no way I could possibly make the time, remember that they can be simple, right? Just remember that they can be simple. And Jane, you touched on this earlier when you said knowing your kids' friends so that you're certain that they have, people they can turn to, that they can trust, who can help them in a
That-
situation like this. I would extend that to their parents too. I feel like this is another reason why it's so critical that parents know the parents of their kids' friends. And trust me, I know from firsthand experience that your kids are not opening the door to that now, right? In fact, they're doing the opposite. They're trying really hard to keep you as in the dark as possible about who their friends are and who their parents are, etc. But when you do know at least a couple of those key parents, those are other people then that your kids can turn to, right? That will be in their world. And frankly, you can set up situations where you say to yourself, okay, I really feel like my kid needs to hear blank. So I'm going to call his best friend's mom and say, listen, next time you see him, if it comes up in the conversation, how about you say this? Because they'll listen to them way more than they'll listen to us, right? Like that's how it works in the teen brain, and that's perfectly normal. And it's also perfectly okay for us to leverage that understanding by using, right, each other as resources for our kids.
yeah.
Those are all important pieces.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point, and it's very true. Chase's friends from her 4 years in high school, I knew all the parents, they knew me, and we trusted each other, and we depended on each other for pickup and drop off and on all those things. And there's three girls, Chase, Emma, and Sam, and I knew that no matter what, whoever's house she was at or who she was with, that she had that support from two other sets of parents.
Yep.
So that was really great, and they always created a safe space for them and made them feel like family and everything else, and I did the same for them. So but it got so comfortable that they would ask me to chime in on debates they were having and stuff like that. So I know for a fact that if any of them had feelings of suicidal tendencies or whatever the case may be, I would have found out about it. I would have gotten a phone call, and like, hey, we need your help or whatever.
Yeah,
So
that's huge.
yeah, it's super huge. My your niece Jenny, she had a friend that the mom, I got to know her, but I also got to know that she had some substance abuse issues and stuff like that. And so when I put in boundaries is when the shit hit the fan, and all of those things. But then Jenny was able to see the true colors. She didn't think it was a big deal at first, but then when she saw how everything was transpiring, and the way that this person was talking to me, she was like, oh, I see now.
Yeah.
So but it's about communicating that and talking to them about that, and showing that what how to see those true colors, and see
Yeah.
beyond that, not get pulled into something that they don't belong in.
I love that. Yeah. And I mean, all of those pieces, right? And I know the common denominator is it keeps coming back to knowing your kids, which seems so simple. And I hope nobody's rolling their eyes right now, but it really kind of comes back to that. And we're hoping that you're taking some things away that are going to make you think about, if you're somebody who worries that you don't have a deep connection with your kid right now to even know if suicide is something that could be a part of them, or that they're suffering from a mental health issue at all, whether it's as something that's leading them to suicidal ideations or not, then we're hoping that you take away from these experiences and these examples that we're offering from our lives, from people we know, etc., and that those are going to be helping you with your own thinking. And at the end of this, I think that the key message is going to be this, right? If your gut tells you something is up, listen to your gut, right? We say that all the time in a lot of different instances, but listen to your gut. And there is zero downside to getting your kid connected with a mental health professional. Zero downside, right? It can be as casual as counseling once in a while when they need it. It can be as significant as therapy if they're really struggling or they have significant issues. But there's no downside. So if your gut tells you something's up, then we're going to encourage you to have a conversation with your kid. And if they deny it and your gut is still saying it, then we're going to encourage you to say, listen, I hope everything you're saying to me right now is 100% accurate of what you're experiencing, but I'm worried enough that I want to make sure. And so we're going to talk about talking to somebody who can be a listener for you, right? Besides me. We're always going to encourage you that you've got to follow that gut, and better to have your kid a little put out, and maybe even to have a couple of sessions and then have a professional go, they're fine, than to not follow that and regret it later.
Yep.
Jane, final word?
It's never too late to start building that good relationship with your child. No matter how bad you think it is or whatever the case may be, there's nothing wrong with saying you're sorry, back and forth, and starting on a clean slate to preserve the life of your child or yourself or your uncle, mother, sister, cousin, whoever it is. It's never too late. There are relationships, Janice and I both have them where that just doesn't need to happen. But if it's really, every situation's different, it's never too late to start building a better relationship, and as long as both sides are willing. So,
That's right.
don't, for the parents out there that think that they have no hope, there's hope for you. Just get the help. Just get the help that they need, and say you're sorry, and move forward.
Yeah.
We keep driving,
right.
looking in the rearview mirror, we're going to crash into something.
I love that so much. Thank you for that. And my final word is this, you guys, because of my experiences, I have learned that no matter your kid, no matter their lifestyle, no matter how happy they seem, don't seem, how engaged they are, not engaged, how active they are at school, not active in school, we never know, right? Most kids who commit suicide are kids that people say, I didn't see it coming. And so with that in mind, every single kid benefits from their parents saying, you are important to me, you are valued in my life, and I don't know what I would do if you were gone. And as a result of my experiences with the kids that I outlined earlier in the episode, that's exactly what I've said to our kids, right? You're important to me, you're of great value to our worlds, and we really don't know what we would do if you were gone. And we don't have to say, please don't commit suicide, right? Or this is a suicide conversation. It's just a message, a very simple message, so that if any voice in their head anywhere is saying to them, nobody would care if you weren't here, that they have an external voice that is countering that. And so I absolutely encourage every single one of you that if you do nothing else after this episode, that you start by saying that to your kid. All right, Jane,
Yep.
we're good?
We're good.
That was a hard one, you guys. Thank you for letting us enter that space with you. Because again, it's not something that we ever want to think about. And we hope that everybody takes away something valuable. As always, like, share, subscribe, do all the things. Because the more we have interaction with our episodes, obviously, the more episodes we can bring to you. And it is such a gift to us to have you all listening on the other end of this. With that, peace out, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye.